Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Kathy Wright, and I am Boost Manager of Strategic Contracting and Procurement. Welcome to the fourth and final presentation in our four-part Oasis Plus series, Introduction to Oasis Plus. Our presenter for today is Megan Hand. Megan is a Senior Contracts and Pricing Consultant with Boost and helps our clients with proposal pricing volumes, including competitive price or fair and reasonable price analyses, wrap rate development, and overall proposal compliance. She also does all things contract, from redlining and negotiating NDAs, teaming agreements, and subcontracts, along with everything else that happens day to day in a contract shop. The presentation portion of today's event will last around 45 minutes, and we will conclude with a questions and answers session for the last 15 minutes. Please use the Zoom questions feature to send me your questions as they come up, and I'll pass them to Megan at the end. After we conclude this series, and I believe sometime next week, we will make all four presentations available through Boost's website. We know you are going to enjoy her presentation, so let's get started. Over to you, Megan.
All right, thank you, Kathy, for that warm introduction. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Megan Hand, and I'm a Senior Contracts and Pricing Consultant here at Boost. We're going to start with discussing some key terms and objectives that are really important for the rest of this presentation. Everything here we're going to go into more detail, but just to give you a little bit of idea, we're going to discuss lateral springboarding, which is when you'll be adding a new master contract. We then have domain enhancement, which is when you would add a domain to your current master contract. Right now, there are about 8 domains out there. Something new to Oasis Plus is the dormant status, which is when your master contract is put on a pause. And we'll discuss what that means a little bit more. Of course, we're going to go through both off-ramping and on-ramping. Preferably not going to be off-ramped, but this could happen, and we're going to discuss how and why. And then on-ramping, which is mostly for new Oasis Plus vendors, but can also apply to current vendors under specific scenarios. The last thing we're going to go over in detail is re-representation. So this is when we're talking about your size business status. If you're a small business, maybe you have a socioeconomic designation, like woman-owned small business, and when you have to represent that and what that means to your company. Next slide, please. Great. We're going to start with lateral springboarding. Lateral springboarding is probably one of the most common ways to enhance your Oasis Plus opportunities. This is where you can add a new master contract. Right now, I have the list of all 6 master contracts over to the right. Please note that this opportunity, lateral springboarding, is not eligible for those who hold an unrestricted master contract only. So if you have an unrestricted master contract, but maybe you are a small business or something has changed in your designation where now you're a small business, this is one of those areas where you're going to have to go through the on-ramping process instead. What this is really for, lateral springboarding, is if you are a woman-owned small business and now you want to go to the total small business pool. Or maybe you now have another socioeconomic designation. You are now SBA, certified for your service disabled veteran-owned small business designation, and you want to increase it. Because opportunities are released per master contract, having more master contract means the more possibilities you have to be eligible for a solicitation to bid and eventually have an award. It is expected that lateral springboarding is going to be available anytime after the initial award phase. So we're still in that initial award phase for Oasis Plus, but we're expected to come to conclusion at it at the end of this year or early next year. So this is the time where you want to get ready for lateral springboarding. Another thing to note is you cannot do lateral springboarding if your master contract is dormant. It has to be active. So if you think you're going to be dormant, and we'll discuss more of when that might happen, you want to be doing lateral springboarding before that happens. Next slide, please. Okay, So of course, it's easy to say we do lateral springboarding. Now let's discuss some of the logistics. The good news is Oasis has made it very easy to do lateral springboarding. All you need are a few documents. The first being a cover letter and a company letterhead, signed by an authorized individual. You're going to then require your Section K, that representations and certifications. And this is because you're most likely certifying that you are now a certain socioeconomic designation, or you're now in the total small business pool, and they need to make sure you're still eligible for those master contracts. And the last thing you need to include is a lateral springboarding summary sheet. And this indicates the domains that you'll be eligible for based on the domains that you currently have. So as we're going to discuss a little bit more about domains, every master contract has up to 8 different domains. And when you do lateral springboarding, you only will receive those domains in which you already have a master contract for. You cannot add domains during lateral springboarding. If you plan on doing that, this will have to be a separate action in conjunction with the dormant, making sure you're not dormant. And you're going to have to reach out to your Oasis Plus CO because there's some specific information when you do multiple actions at once. As you can see from here, the great thing is none of the pricing is required. You don't need to go and fill out the matrix, the scorecard, or anything like that. Next slide, please. Okay. As we briefly talked about, domain enhancement is where you will go and you can add additional domains. Right now, there are 8 domains. So we have the management and advisory, the facilities, technical and engineering, logistics, intelligence services, research and development, the environmental, and the enterprise solutions. Each one of these has their own subset of NAICS codes under them and has their certain criteria. These are the ones currently available during what we're calling Oasis Plus Phase 1, which is what we're under right now. During Phase 2, it is expected that there will be additional domains, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. The thing to know about domain enhancement is the government may decide to limit domain enhancement requests based on the current need. So if, for example, maybe there are a lot of contractors with management advisory, but not as many with facilities, they may only allow domain enhancement for facilities for a certain point in time. So you need to pay attention if that is a certain point in time. If you are eligible, you might need to wait for a specific window of opportunity. Next slide, please. Okay. Now a little bit of the logistics for the domain enhancements. Domain enhancements are a lot more thorough than just lateral springboarding. They are performed via contract modification and do still require a cover letter just like lateral springboarding. The big difference is it also requires the proposal that's in response to the most current or recent Oasis Plus solicitation. So that includes the entire scorecard, qualifying projects, all of that information that you had to submit to make sure that you met that minimum threshold. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with Oasis Plus, or maybe it's been a year or more since you've submitted, the way Oasis Plus works is that instead of it being this best value trade-off where they're reviewing technical expertise, management, past performance, and weighing it against price or other factors, they have a scorecard with different criteria, and we'll give a sample a little bit later that we can review. And you have to meet a minimum number of those, which you get from these points, to be eligible for an award. So what you did for the original Oasis Plus proposal, you will need to do for domain enhancements. The positive is you will not require a price proposal. So that's at least one thing that will not have to be performed, and any sort of that responsibility information where you had to support, financial data, that backup documentation, that is not required because you already have it under a current master contract. What I do want people to note for domain enhancements, besides making sure that there's an open period, is that if you are not deemed to be qualified, so you have 180 days from that rejection of you not deemed qualified to when you can apply for a domain enhancement again. So it is incredibly important that you make sure that you are qualified the first time because it could be an incredibly long amount of time until you can apply for another domain enhancement. Next slide, please. So as we briefly discussed, right now we're in phase 1 of Oasis Plus. Phase 2, which is expected to be some point in FY25, but there's not much details. I did try to ask GSA if they had any more, they don't. It's really after, they do the initial award, they'll get to this part of it. There's going to be additional domains. There's expected to right now be 5. So those are financial services, business administration, human capital, marketing, and social services. These ones will all come with their own additional NAICS codes and might allow more vendors and contractors to expand their services because you might have more qualifying projects under these new domains than the current 8 under the current Oasis Plus. So please keep a lookout for these. They're not out yet. This hasn't been solidified, but this is on the horizon. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Megan. I'm going to jump in here and interrupt you for a moment and do our first poll. This is an easy one. For Oasis Plus, my company's current status is we have a master contract award and we're looking forward to our first task order proposal. We have a proposal in process and we're waiting to hear if we won. We received an unsuccessful offer letter, but we want to try again at the next onboarding opportunity. Or we haven't tried to join Oasis and we're just listening to Boost in this webinar to figure out if that's something that fits our company. And the vast majority, Megan, are saying that they have the award, but they're looking forward to the first opportunity to bid a task order. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And Megan, back over to you.
Thank you. I think everyone is very much waiting of when this is really going to be taking off. Okay, well, the opposite of taking off, we're going to discuss dormant status. Dormant status is new to Oasis Plus. This was not something included under Oasis. What this means is your contract, the master contract, will be put on pause. If you are, let's say, not complying with the terms and conditions, this could be because maybe we're not meeting the limitations on subcontracting. This also could be, and we'll discuss this a bit later, maybe because you no longer can represent of the size status. I mentioned master contract because dormant status can be at the master contract level, but it can also be at the CLIN level, which is where your domains are and your NAICS codes are. And we're going to discuss a little bit more of why that might happen when we talk about the re-representation of your size status. The good news is for dormant status, it does not affect your previously awarded task orders. So if you go into dormant status, but you have a task order in option year 1, you can still have your option year 2, 3, and 4 exercise. It will not affect it. You can also, in dormant status, and I find this very interesting, still accept a logical follow-on on a sole source basis. This, of course, is going to be very niche and dependent on your contracting officer, but maybe you have a task order. You're in this middle of this research project, and the government deemed that if it went competitive or to anyone else, it would not make sense. Maybe there's a continuity issue. They could issue you a follow-on contract based upon this requirement under your Oasis Plus master contract, even though it's dormant. You just cannot be eligible for any opportunity that's open for competition. The other thing, just for everyone to note, is dormant status is very different from when we're talking about debarment, cancellation, suspension, or termination. Those are terms we'll discuss during off-ramping, but for dormant status, it's really a pause. It's nothing that you have to annotate or report to in your SAM.gov. I know many people are nervous because you have to click certain buttons on whether or not there's been debarment or termination. This is not applicable for it. Next slide, please. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about off-ramping. And you can see from the beginning, off-ramping is available for those who do not comply with the terms and conditions. This is the exact same thing I just said for being in a dormant status because they're both eligible. There is no logical way of the government saying you have to go in dormant status first. This is maybe a letter of concern type of behavior, and then you are off ramp. That is not a requirement, and the government does not have to specifically choose one or the other. It depends on the specific scenario. Another way you might be off ramped is if you do not meet the minimum sales requirement. Again, as we mentioned in previous webinars, this is also another thing that's really subjective for the CO. And if you do not meet the minimum sales requirement, then maybe you're not very far from being off, or you can show that you've tried to bid on 5, 10 proposals and just were not successful. They could still keep you on an exercise option anyway. Off-ramping can also happen if you had a termination under a task order award from Oasis Plus that affects the master contract, or maybe if you were debarred. So there's a lot of reasons why you can be off-ramped. The good news is generally, off-ramping does not affect your previously awarded task orders. The bad news is it can be happening as a result of a termination for convenience or default. And I say maybe because off-ramping can happen in multiple different ways. It can be that you get to year 5 of your contract. Maybe they just don't exercise your option. You have not been meeting the minimum sales requirement. They just don't exercise the option, and therefore you've been off-ramped. It could be that they issue the termination for convenience or termination for default. Or there is also a no-cost cancellation clause under the GSA provisions that they could use instead. So off-ramping could happen in a multitude of ways, and it just truly depends on what action is the reason for off-ramping and what the contracting officer decides to do. Next slide, please. Well, now that we've discussed off-ramping and really our goal is to try to avoid that as possible, let's talk a little bit more about on-ramping. So with Oasis Plus, a great thing and compared to Oasis is there should be the continuous on-ramping that allows businesses to join Oasis Plus. How that will work is there will be an on-ramp notice published. So as those of you who may remember when Oasis Plus first came out, it was publicized under sam.gov, and you can see those notices. This is what will happen with the on-ramping. Something to note, the government does reserve the right to change those evaluation criteria, the competition, the methods on this. So even though we're talking about a scorecard having to meet the minimum requirements, the government could modify that if it's in their best interest. So although we can prepare using those, it's subject to change. Your master contract during the on-ramping phase should be identical for those during the current Oasis Plus phase. And I say this because there could be scenarios, even though we say this is mostly for late bidders, if let's say you only have an unrestricted contract and you want to add in master contracts, you have to go through the on-ramping phase. So you're going to see you might now have 2 master contracts. They should look pretty much the same. A really good thing to note is for on-ramping, you are immediately eligible to bid once you receive your notice to proceed. There is no waiting period. You do not have to wait till the next option year or anything like that. The uncertainty here is just how long it will take the government to review your bid. And of course, we know right now the government has been taking over a year to review these few thousand that's come in under Oasis Plus. This should be a lot reduced, during the on-ramping phase, but it could still be a time for the evaluation process. Next slide, please. Okay. So now that we've discussed a little bit about on-ramping, the overview, I want to go through what are the key criteria for on-ramping, how that evaluation method works, and the basics of this is the qualifying projects. So a qualifying project is what you use to really demonstrate your ability to meet that master contract in that domain and to be eligible for award. It can be a single contract, a single task order, just a regular task order. It can be an OTA or even a collection of task orders. If you do a collection of task orders, that can only happen once. This most likely would happen if maybe you have a BPA where the government issues a task or, really a call order for every single option year. So it does not meet your minimum requirement for the year because maybe they're only 500,000 and that minimum requirement for the year for a qualifying project is 1 million. You can use it as a collection, but again, it's only been able to do once. Any qualifying project has to be for services. You cannot use it for supplies. And they have to meet or exceed that minimum average annual value. And we're going to go over this a little bit more in a second. You can see what I mean. But the basics is that each master contract and each domain has its own distinct average annual value for the qualifying project. A qualifying project also has to be ongoing or completed within 5 years and has to have a positive past performance rating. The important part to note here is that as we're going through on-ramping and we're discussing lateral springboarding, domain enhancements, and everything, is that this could change, right? As you go through and maybe, 3 years from now, that project that you thought was qualifying might no longer be eligible because now it's been 5 years since when now you're doing, this new bid. And the thing to note is that your qualifying project may or may not be relevant to the domain you're looking for. I know this sounds a little bit interesting, but the reason why is because not only is Oasis looking at, have you done this type of work before? So let's talk about logistics as your domain. Have you done logistics works before? But they're also looking at other things such as, have you managed subcontractors before? Have you managed people with security clearances? Do you have positive past performance evaluation? Other aspects that other projects might speak to besides just the one where it falls under your domain. Important thing, and many of you probably remember this from your initial Oasis Plus submission, is you have to have distinct qualifying projects and only a maximum of 5. What we mean by distinct, and we'll go through this a little bit on the next slides, is that even if you have a great project, it does logistics, it does things with environmental, maybe it does things with even enterprise. You can't use that one qualifying project as it currently stands to support all of those domains. And this is the thing that has made it a lot more difficult for many vendors when they're trying to be eligible because you only have so many contracts. Next slide, please. Okay. So now that we discussed qualifying project, one of the important aspects is that every qualifying project, you're going to have to go undergo a project verification form. So I'm showing you an example of the form. There are also different forms and different criteria if your project is not governmental, maybe it's a commercial project because that's eligible and that's allowed. It could look a little bit different. But you're going to go through and enter in the basic data. This includes things like the contract name, the information, your period of performance, the NAICS code, which of course is very important because that does determine relevancy if you are trying to show a relevant contract. You need to include the total amount of value because again, all these aspects are then used in your qualification matrix in your scorecard. Next slide, please. Another part of the form is showing if there is a relevancy. As I mentioned, you do not necessarily have to have a relevancy, but if you do, you need to demonstrate from your qualifying project how it maps to your current work being performed. The positive is there is such a thing called automatic relevancy. So let's say you're performing on a contract. Your current contract that you're using as qualifying project has a NAICS code of 541511. If that is a NAICS code under the domain that you're bidding towards, that can be considered automatic relevancy. Something really important to note here is a lot of the verifications on here is going to come from the government, from your SF 1449s, and from FPDS. So what makes this difficult is these forms have to be signed by a contracting officer or a contracting officer's representative, depending on what you're trying to prove. And that could be difficult if this is a few years old. So it's important to have your points of contact up to date if you can find them and use FPDS. They usually show who the last person was that performed an action if you need to go seek down signatures. You also want to make sure that FPDS which is a system that shows all of your contract actions, things like the NAICS code, the value, the period performance is accurate. This is because if you're, let's say, submitting an SF 1449, or you're looking at your FPDS record and it's saying that your period performance is only 2 years, but in reality, there was a mod performed or something was done where it was 5 years, there's now going to be a verification issue and that needs to be resolved. Some of you may remember going to the contracting officers during the Oasis Plus original phase and having to try to ask them to update records. It's a lot harder to do it when you have been working with them for, a couple years. So please, another reminder, check these records on a regular basis. Check your SF30s, your 1449s, or any sort of award documentation that you have to make sure that it's valid, because it will come in very handy in this scenario. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Megan. And we're going to pause here for our second poll of the day. This one is about the size, the business size of the folks that are watching today. Looking for roughly the number of employees that we have. I see the votes coming in. And it looks like the majority of our listeners today have between 50 and 100 employees. A very, very close second, however, less than 50 employees. And then the other two categories, 100 to 200 and more than 200, are about neck and neck as well. So thanks everyone for that reply. And Megan, on to your next slide.
Wonderful. All right, so I know a lot of the juicy things here is the scorecard. This is really what determines whether or not you are eligible for an award. We're going to go over a sample of 2 scorecards, one for unrestricted, the other for small business, both for the same domain. So this is just an example for the research and development domain. And we can kind of get an idea of what a scorecard looks like and what this means, especially for those who are new to Oasis Plus. So I highlighted and circled a couple different areas in green. These are the areas that are going to change between the unrestricted and the small business scorecard. To more keep in mind that scorecards are very specific to a master contract and a domain. It's going to include things like your quality control, your management, your past performance. In unrestricted, it discusses small business utilization and partnerships. It can also talk about competition, relevancy, and other sort of criteria. This is just a sample. There's a lot more to it. What will happen is on the top, it shows you what that annual average value has to be for a qualifying project. That's the QP for the specific domain and master contract. In this scenario, it shows 1.25 million. So you first need to make sure that you have that as the minimum basis. After that, you can then go through here and see where can you receive credits. So on the complete right-hand side, you can see the maximum credits that you can get for one of the criteria. And in this scenario, for example, the first one, if you have a qualifying project that manages 5 or more first-tier subcontractors, then you can receive a credit for it. And each one can have up to a certain amount of credits, and it could depend on how many areas you might be able to check. So under past performance, for example, you can see that you would receive the full 3 credits if all of your past performances are positive. If you might only have some that are maybe satisfactory or neutral, you will receive less credits. After you go through this entire scorecard, you then end up with having 50 eligible points for this one. That's in the bottom right. And again, there's missing some of this here. This is just a snippet. And to be eligible for this domain under this master contract, so this is the research and development domain under the unrestricted master contract, you need to receive 42 points. The great thing is the way Symphony works, which is where Oasis Plus contracts are, is it does have an automatic scoring system. So as you go through, you're looking at your proposal, you're uploading documentation. As you do it, it will start keeping track of your score to see if you're eligible. There are some nuances with Symphony, but this is a positive thing for those who are working on it. You're staying in the middle of the action. You maybe decide you want to change your qualifying project because you're not meeting the minimum criteria. If you're not on Symphony yet, you don't want to look at it, these sort of criteria and the scorecard is still available under the current Oasis Plus master contracts in SAM.gov. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here, we're just going to take a look in the next slide of the differences between the scorecards between the unrestricted and the small business. So I say small business because there is only one difference, or really one sort of matrices for all the small business ones. So whether it's total small business, your women-owned small business, they don't each have a separate scorecard. All the small businesses are under here. You can see at the top, it starts with the good news. You need a lower dollar value for your qualifying project. So a lot of what Oasis is doing is keeping in mind small businesses don't have as many qualifying projects, and they might not have as large qualifying projects. You can see, for example, under the management and staffing, whereas the unrestricted said managing 5 or more first-tier subcontractors, here you only need to manage 3 or more. This is also why you might be eligible for this domain under your small business master contract, but not under the unrestricted master contract. And if you go to the bottom right, you will then see that the threshold, luckily, is only 36 compared to 42. So they are keeping like a lot more a leeway for small businesses to be eligible for these master contracts in these domains. Next slide, please. Here is just an example overall. I want to more demonstrate on here how there are different thresholds for each domain, and those are the ones on the left. So T&E is technical and engineering, M&A management and advisory, research and development, those different domains. And for whether it's unrestricted master contract or the small business master contracts. So you can see that it's different both ways. So it's really important when you're looking at master contracts and you are trying to decide what domains can you go for, what master contracts can you go for, that you check what those thresholds are for qualifying projects, and you check what your thresholds are, because you might not be eligible for some domains and you might be eligible for others. Next slide, please. All right, so we went over just the basics of really on-ramping the main areas of the scorecard. Something a little bit separate from both the on-ramping, the off-ramping, lateral, and all that information is the re-representation, but still very important when we're talking about whether your company is going to grow and whether or not maybe you need a new master contract or what you can do. So overarching idea is that your initial small business size status is locked in at contract award. The contracting officers, and we've mentioned this previously, they may require recertification of your size status at the task order level, but that will not impact your master contract. The important part, and I know a lot of vendors who are small businesses are looking at this, is that prior to your 5th year, you have to recertify. And of course, if you're growing, that might mean that between now and your 5th year, you are no longer a small business. High level, this could mean you go into dormant status, which means your contract is not immediately terminated. So as we've discussed previously, during dormant status, you still can be eligible for a sole source award on the logical follow-on basis, but you're not as eligible for many other things. You're also, when you're in dormant status, you can't go through and do lateral springboarding and really expand your contract. So anything you want to do prior to going into dormant status. Next slide, please. The important thing to know is that NAICS code plays a very big aspect for your dormant status and your re-representation of size status. On the left, I'm showing a snippet of what your master contract will look like. So each master contract shows the domains you're eligible for, and then all of the NAICS codes under those domains. So here, I highlighted in green 2 boxes for 2 different NAICS codes under the technical and engineering domain. Why this is important is because when you are re-representing your size status, you will be doing it at the CLIN level. So you can see here, these are the CLINs in your master contract. So there is the possibility that only some CLINs are going to be dormant, and those would be the ones that you cannot bid other contracts on. The other thing to note, and I have this as a visual on the right, is the way your contract works is your master contract will only hold one single NAICS code. And that's more administrative than anything because FPDS, which is the system of record of all contracts, it cannot include multiple different NAICS codes right now. So what the government has done here is it has determined the NAICS code if you are a small business and you have a small business master contract that is for personnel, the number of employees, if possible, and is the highest amount. So for example, if you have those four CLINs, the 541330 to the 541715, all under your master contract, and most likely you're going to have a lot more than this. They're going to take the one that's employee-based and the one that is the highest employee-based and call that your master contract NAICS code. This is the idea, at least behind it, is that then your master contract will not go into dormant status because most likely for small businesses, you size out of the revenue-based ones. So $20 million, you're most likely to hit prior to getting to over 1,000 employees. So they're going to use the employee base for your master contract NAICS code, and that will keep your master contract active and only the CLIN levels dormant if you cannot represent that size status. Just to know, I know we're talking a lot about small businesses here. For those unrestricted master contracts, it is the exact opposite. And for the unrestricted master contract, for the NAICS code for the master contract, they are going to revenue base in the lowest amount. So they're really trying to show the differences of, making sure most people as possible are other than small businesses for the unrestricted master contract. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. So from that, I hope you took away some key takeaways. Lateral springboarding and domain enhancements are the specific and the most readily available avenues for you to expand your business under Oasis Plus. Good news, sizing out doesn't immediately mean that all your work stops, and it doesn't mean your entire Oasis Plus contract goes away. And of course, on-ramping provides a second chance to join Oasis Plus, or even for those who maybe have just an unrestricted master contract and are now eligible for small business master contracts, a way for them to also expand their businesses. Next slide, please.
Okay, and before we go to the next slide, we have our last poll of the day and of the series. This is a bit of a survey for how valuable this webinar series has been for you. It was easy, informative, and easy to understand. Too short, and we need more. Too long, we would have preferred fewer sessions, or not helpful to you at all. We do love the feedback. Thank you for the honest feedback. And it looks like all the results are in, and thank you. The majority of the feedback is very positive, and we do appreciate the support of everyone who's joined us throughout the series.
No, and I really appreciate everyone that joined us as well.
And I think it's time to move to the question and answer session of the presentation. Megan, it was a great presentation. It looks like the government really gave this some thought and added efficiencies to help sustain the contracting base as master contract holders expand their capabilities and their size. I think it's a great model.
Yeah, plenty of opportunity here, right? We're talking over 100 billion. So really, if you're a small business or even not a small business, you want to be on Oasis Plus.
Yes, I agree 100%. For the first question, if I springboard from one domain to another, or if I outgrow my size standard, will I receive separate master contracts, or will my existing contract be modified to show those changes?
So every master contract is separate. So let's say you're going to size out. You're a small business and now you're going to be a large business. You need to go through the process of receiving an unrestricted master contract. Nothing is automatic in this scenario here. If you do the lateral springboarding, it will result in a new master contract. The only thing that will not result in a new master contract is a domain enhancement, which will just be a contract modification to an existing master contract.
Gotcha. Are companies able to use the same contracts for domain enhancement as for the original Oasis Plus bid? I think you covered a little of this, but would you revisit that?
Yeah, so this goes through the qualifying project. So the evaluation criteria still is the same or expected to be the same, which means one qualifying project for any sort of these bids. So if you did use it previously, as of right now, you are not eligible to use it again. This could be changed. The government could decide that this is not in their best interest, which is why I want to briefly mention you can always check what they're going to be using as the evaluation criteria again. The other aspect is maybe if you used only a task order, but there's a couple other task orders under BPA, you can use another one of those. Or if you did not use the full value of that qualifying project, because only 30% really was relevant and that's what you showed, you can use the other part of that qualifying project.
Understood. Understood. Can those holding an unrestricted master contract use domain enhancement as well to add domains?
Yes, so domain enhancement is available for those with the unrestricted master contract too. And it does include, just like the small businesses, you're going to have to go through that proposal process with that scorecard matrix.
Okay. Next question is two parts. Are there additional requirements for lateral springboarding from one of the socioeconomic set asides to unrestricted? And then the second part is, does the summary sheet require you to demonstrate that you meet the higher unrestricted scorecard requirements?
No, and that's a great question. As of right now, the way that Oasis Plus is written is that there are no additional requirements to go that direction. What it does say is that the summary sheet, you are putting your eligible domains. So it's not necessarily showing that you meet a scorecard requirement. It's showing the domains that you've already met and just mapping those to the new master contract. So there's no need to put in your score that you received or if you're eligible from the new different criteria.
Okay, okay. And the minimum sales requirement for the base period, that's $250,000 across that time, right? Across that five.
Yes, the initial 5 years. So there is a pretty substantial amount of time to receive that 250,000. Of course, it might not always happen. And if it doesn't happen, it does not mean your contract necessarily is going to end, but you really are probably going to have to show that you've made an effort to try to receive some work under Oasis Plus.
Okay. What if you're a business and you hold a total small master and an unrestricted master, but you want to add domains to each? Do you just take a separate path for each one, or is there a shortcut? How do you do this?
This is one of those things where you're going to have to do the domain enhancement. And because the domain enhancement is going to look different for your unrestricted and your total small business, it's going to be two different scorecards, right? Because as we took a brief look at, your unrestricted is probably going to have higher criteria than your not unrestricted, your small business one. So you're going to have to submit two or more depending on what you're doing.
Got it. Yep, that makes sense to me. Megan, if you don't get an award, but then you try again at the next on ramp, can you use the same qualifying projects again?
Yes, you can use the same qualifying projects if you don't have an award. What I would make sure to do is, because most likely if you did not receive an award, you thought you were going to meet the minimum requirements, though, figure out why those qualifying projects you submitted did not meet what you thought were the minimum requirements. And a lot of this, it seems like, has to do with if the government cannot verify your qualifying project, which speaks to the making sure your contract documentation is up to date, checking FPDS. And for anyone here who doesn't know how to check FPDS or know as much information when I say FPDS, let me know. We can always reach out and help you navigate that, and that would be helpful for it. And just in general, if you have not received an award yet, there is still the rolling awards period. So it does not mean you did not receive an award until you receive an official letter saying that you've not received an award, in which case, ask for a debrief. Make sure you get the information the government can give you to figure out why you did not receive an eligible award.
That is great advice. Absolutely. And remember, there's a clock on the debrief, so you have to request it very quickly. I think it's 5 days after you get your unsuccessful notification letter.
Yes, do it as quick as possible, honestly. And just to kind of add it, debrief advice, if there are any specific questions, you can ask the government specific questions you want to discuss in the debrief, and they should be able to if it falls under certain criteria.
Yes, agree. And I think there's value in giving the government a heads up on your questions ahead of time, right? Because
Agreed.
they'll be ready with anything that they can answer with the debrief. And sometimes they'll just send it to you by email and you won't have to set aside time to meet.
Yes, and then they could just answer it there versus receiving, this email with a debrief that doesn't actually answer what you want to know and give you recommendations or feedback of what you can do differently to submit a new bid and receive the eligible award.
Yes, and one of my colleagues has just sent me a note. It is 3 days. It's not even 5 days. So the debrief window is very, very short. If you get that letter, get that request out as fast as you can. That's great. Let's see. Other than a change in SBA small business rules, could you speculate on why an OCO would ask a task order bidder to recertify business size if the SAM.gov is registration is current and all of our size data is in there?
Yes, and this is a really important question. I have seen this happen before. In this type of scenario, one of the things the government clearly wanted to do was narrow down the competition. They knew that there were some competitors, this included the incumbent, who was now a large business, and they did not want this anymore. So the government may use this as a methodology to receive less bids and maybe narrow it down to some companies who they possibly don't want to do business with anymore.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you. Let's see, back to the minimum sales. In one of your previous webinars, I saw that contractors have to sell at least 250,000 in the base period. Is this per master contract, per domain, or both, or just
Per master
total
contract.
per master contract?
Yes. So this is where, each master contract, and this is why we keep using the phrase master contract, because they're separate, right? Domains do fall under a master contract, but one master contract is separate from another. You can receive a bid on one of them and not another. One can go dormant and not another one can go dormant. They're very separate sort of vehicles.
Okay. Does Oasis Plus allow for contractor teaming arrangements or CTAs? And if so, could I co-prime with a partner who has a master contract in a domain I aspire to gain past performance? Or do all CTA members have to hold the same master contract domains?
No, and that's a great question. So Oasis Plus is eligible for both CTAs as well as joint ventures. These do require new master contracts. What is not required is that both parties in a CTA are both domain holders or master contract holders. Let's say, for example, you want to go for the woman-owned small business master contract. What you do need is both CTA members have to be woman-owned small businesses to be eligible for the award. When this happens, there are some nuances with the qualifying projects because now you have multiple different primes, and the same with joint ventures. I recommend you reaching out to us with specific information or specific questions if you have this happen to you, because your qualifying projects might be a little bit different than what we've discussed when there's multiple primes. Because now you're really creating, in the government's mind, a separate entity that's receiving the award.
Okay, that's a good answer too. Thank you for that, Megan. That
Yes.
is that's everything. Those are all the questions that we had in today's queue. Thank you, Megan, for the information that you shared. For our listeners, if you have additional questions or you think of them after you log off today, please send them to us by email and we'll respond to you back by email. We want to thank everyone for coming today. And for those of you that attended the whole series, wonderful. We're so happy to have you and we do appreciate your support. Thank you all and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.